Guys, welcome to Real Talk. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you kindly for joining us. Well done, Joey Rifkin. Happy Friday morning to you guys. A Central Virginia, Charlottesville, Commonwealth and Country, worldwide audience at our disposal. And folks, you, the viewer and listener, can chime in with perspectives, comments, questions on the show. Katie Pearl, welcome to the broadcast. We love you, KP. And we were at a stomping grounds yesterday that is very near and dear to your heart. We will connect off air, my friend. So much to cover on today's show. The questions are already coming in for Quinton Beckham. It's our guest, QB, the benevolent dictator and all-around great guy, a man who, behind the scenes, is like a puppeteer with businesses on a string running successfully all over the Commonwealth. Is that a great description, QB?
I like that description. I'm going to embrace that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are you? I haven't seen you in a minute.
I know. It feels like it's been forever since I've been sitting at this table with this mic in my face.
A different mic.
I am so happy to have a mic set up for a left-hander.
Well, you know what?
Because, I'm always worried about knocking it around.
We've been doing this show for 6 years. This speaks to your creativity and ingenuity. 6 years, no one has come up with that idea. Think about that.
They just weren't as annoyed as I was.
Well, Keith is also a left-hander.
Well, yeah, but, he's got that military thing. He just goes with the flow and follows the rules.
He came up with the idea of taking the microphone from chair number 3 and making it the microphone for chair number 2, so the left-hander does not get blocked by the mic arm. That was creative.
I'd like you all to notice his chair is chair number 1. I'm not saying there's any sort of psychological thing in that, but...
Chair number 2 is the color commentator or lead and analyst chair. Meredith Young, who I believe is one of your team members, watching the program as we speak. Katie Pearl, questions and comments are coming in fast and furious. Before we get to them, Quinton, talk to us about your travels, my friend.
Oh gosh, we've just been everywhere. I can't even begin. So we had a Keller Williams conference in Austin. We had a regional conference, so all of the Keller Williams for the Virginias, that was in Roanoke. This was followed by the Virginia Association of Realtors, the state conference, which was in Richmond. And I am in the office until next Thursday, and then I get to take a week off and go to the beach with my logical family.
Is that the Mangionis?
That is part of it, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that is part of it.
Those are good people. Is the pooch coming?
There will be a dog in the house, yes.
Okay. Very nice. So, should we get to the nitty-gritty? Let's talk about what the masterminds are thinking. The Virginia Realtors Broker Survey, open-ended. Where do you want to go?
So, it's everybody's like, every time you turn around, there's news about the economy because we're trying to follow inflation, mortgage rates, supply chain issues. What's the next thing that's going to happen with the war, with Russia and Ukraine? When are cars actually going to start going back into production, and what does this look like for everybody? And so you have economists suddenly are really important people. They get to come out of the basement filing room and stand in the spotlight for a while. They're getting their day in the sun. And we've had, if you follow this sort of thing, there's lots of predictions. And then also at the Virginia Realtors Conference, we had Ryan Price, which is the chief economist for the state. And he did sort of an amalgamation presentation along with his own insights into what we should expect for the rest of the year and most likely into the new year.
Okay.
So, we're looking at mortgage rates now, and we know the Fed's just raised those. So 75 basis points, went up again on Wednesday, not unexpected. In fact, there was some talk that it might actually be a solid percent.
Yeah.
Yes. But they didn't do that. And all of that based on the inflation numbers. So mortgage rates are a big concern. As you go through time with rising home prices and rising mortgage rates, you start to price people out. There's not a direct connection, mind you, between what the Fed rate is and what mortgage rates are.
Sure.
They're tied more to the 10-year Treasury.
Yeah. They're like second cousins, if you may.
They are like second cousins, which in some families I know is closer than others, but still. So it's more like it's a good old mountainous second cousin relationship. But what the Fed has done a really good job of so far this year is telegraphing. So we talk a lot about how expectations affect reality. That's one of our running themes, and it's part of what the future is going to hold for us. So the Feds have done a really good job of telegraphing what they're going to do, which gives companies like mortgage companies a chance to slowly sort of predict and dial in to what the upcoming rate change is. So most of the change that's going to happen in mortgage rates because of Wednesday's call started 2 weeks ago.
Sure.
And has started ramping up before this 75 basis point raise even came out. If you watched the last time they did this, there was a little bit of a spike in mortgage rates and then they dropped back down a little bit again. You're going to see something similar happen now. So it's more of an increase in volatility than an actual firm 0.75 of a percentage point rise.
Okay.
Most of the predictions now are telling us that we're going to see rates somewhere in the, let's say, plus or minus 10 basis points, 6% range. And that this will continue into next year and maybe even slack down a little bit because, remember, mortgage companies use rates to control the pipeline.
Right.
So if you go back in time to when we were having 2% mortgages, 2.5% mortgages, and all the refis started flowing in, remember there was that percentage point bump that mortgage companies did to slow it down, just to make people take a breath because they could only process so many? As you start to see buyer demand fall, there's a fair chance that the mortgage companies will break away from being so closely tied to that 10-year treasury and drop those down to help induce some
demand.
To help drive demand.
Yeah.
You see it all the time. It's a very retail style thing. And if you think about mortgage rates in general, we had these mortgage rates in the 2000s. So, you know, we're still lower than the 90s, the 80s, the 70s. We had these in the 2000s. It's just in the 10s to 20s that we've had rates that were lower than 5%.
Sure, we got trained.
And so we've been trained to expect these, and you know, we're going to have to let that go. We're going to have to change our expectations a little bit. But, you know, most of the 2000s mortgage rates were at 6.3%. If you go back to the 90s, which I know is when most of our growing home buyers were born, but if you go back into the 90s, they were 8.1. In the 80s, they were 12.7. So we're not yet at a place where they are terribly higher than what most of the market has been for our lifetime.
Voice of Reason, QB, Woody Fincham. Salutations from Louisville, Kentucky, everyone. It's Bourbon Central here, and leave it to
Woody.
QB to make a cousin joke. That was classic, hilarious, and I spit a little water out this morning. Kevin Yancey in Waynesboro says, good morning, fellas. All right, so let's talk. You're taking the voice of reason, the calm hand approach, which you usually do. You do this because you have, let's cut to the chase, a couple hundred people, if not more, that rely on your vision and decision making. Is it more? It's a lot. We'll call it a couple hundred.
I was questioning more how much they rely on me and whether that was a wise move or not.
It is a wise move. You got a proven track record. I'll throw this to you, my friend. Buyer demand is diminishing a little bit as rates have gone up. We've seen the days on market get longer, and sales volumes in just about every jurisdiction in the car footprint is 18 to 20% down year over year. Buckingham County, the only jurisdiction, and this is a positive, not for Buckingham, but for car footprint. Buckingham County, the only jurisdiction in the car footprint that is down from a price point standpoint, home valuation standpoint, year over year. All the other ones, Quinton, have held their values. That's what folks are wondering about. Your take on valuations and holding them and where they're going to go.
I think as a general rule, they're still going to go up. So remember, demand is not just about one side of the equation, it's the teeter-totter. So if you look at inventory, that is one side of that equation, the other side being demand. So we know that as mortgage rates have gone up, it has priced people out of the market. We have buyer fatigue in some cases where they just said, screw it, I'm going to sign a lease, and I'm going to sign a 2-year lease so that I get a better rent rate. And they are moving out of the market in that way. And then we have some other folks that, because they just don't have confidence in the economy, you know, a house is really a place where a job goes to sleep at night. And so if they're not feeling confident about that, the opportunity in their own psyche to buy a house and feel confident about it is going to back off. And so you've had buyer demand drop. Some people have been priced out of the market. Some are maybe experiencing job changes, which we can say more about jobs. And some just are sitting back to wait and see what happens. But that still is not lower than as low as the inventory has dropped. So we've been talking a lot about days on market and inventory going up, but as of this last week across the state, and this is probably pretty consistent in Carr, although I have not looked up that number, we're still at 1.5 months worth of inventory. So remember, if 6 months is an even market, 1.5 is still heavily a seller's market and is still very, very low in the amount of inventory that we're used to doing at the pace. So we're still selling at a really fast rate. We still have much more demand than we do inventory, and that's going to support home values. So if you look at home values 2022 versus 21, there's an 8% gain. That means for most of 2022, just that year, home owners gained about $40,000 worth of equity that they didn't have in 2020. And even if there's a price moderation that eats away at 5 or 10,000, still way ahead of the game. So sellers by no means are suffering. It may feel like it because they're no longer the only dance at the prom. They still are in a really, really good position. It's a really good time to sell a house if you need to do that. And you're just not going to have the number of offers that you thought you might have had 6 months ago.
Quinton Beckham dropping knowledge here. Comments, put them in the feed. We will relay them live on air. I'm seeing the DMs coming in. Realtors, if you have questions, this is a good man to ask. This is a connected guy here. This is coming in from Spotify for Quinton Beckham. Please ask QB. I love when they call you QB. Please ask QB, for the first-time home buyer, is it more difficult for them to purchase a house now with where rates were? Or was it more difficult for us to purchase a house in the peak of the pandemic when you had, God, smart question, the appraisal gap coverage and the bonanza with multiple buyers? That's a hell of a question right there.
I think it was harder back in the peak of the pandemic. You know, if you have to sort out what's the goal. So one of the things that I think buyers are having to spend more time thinking about is how this impacts rents. So if you're not going to buy a house, you have to rent a place to live, assuming that you need a place to live. And rents have skyrocketed at a rate that is faster than home values. And so even with the raising mortgage rates, you're still looking at a better equation to own a home versus renting one, assuming they're similar homes in a similar area. So if you're the buyer in the peak of the pandemic, and we have some data from surveys that Virginia Realtors has done, if you go back in time, let's see, looking. If you went back to February of this year, according to a flash survey from Virginia Realtors, the average home, February and March, was getting 6 to 7 offers. So no matter how good you were as a buyer, no matter how low the mortgage rates, you were actively competing for things like price, home inspection, appraisal gap, mortgage versus cash. When were you going to close? Were you going to give complimentary seller possession? Thank you for that, Jason.
Jason Kirby.
What were you going to do up to and including delivering pizza and maybe a very well-behaved firstborn child to be the buyer that won that race? And if you fast forward to today on the recent survey, the number of offers per home is now less than 2. For most homes, it's 1. So yes, are you going to pay more in interest rates? You are, but think of what that's buying you. It's buying you the actual opportunity to negotiate, because prior to that, it was the gladiator of real estate. Last man standing was the one that bought the house, and everybody else had to suffer through it and find where their real limits are. So if you are still in a space where the mortgage rate, your monthly income, and the median home price means that you're in the crowd that can still get into the game, it's still a really good time to get into the game as a buyer, because now you can negotiate things like home inspection. When is it going to close? Maybe some seller paid closing costs, things that you couldn't have done before, and the sellers are still getting a good price. So this is more of an everybody wins game if you're able to get it and you find a house in the reduced inventory that is one that you want.
Quinton Beckham on fire right now, dropping knowledge. Katie Pearl, a Keller Williams talented agent, a Cubana, a mother of 5, a vivacious and beautiful woman, has this: there are still ways to help buyers with the rate concern. Certain lenders are offering an option where the seller or buyer, if they want to go that way, can pay down the rate by 2 points for the first year, 1 point the second year, and then the rate normalizes to today's rates on year 3. This option buys the client some options and some time. Quinton Beckham.
It does. I mean, I just think it's a matter of a trade-off. Everything is a trade-off. And so you're trading off some things to get others. There's many, many ways to sit down with a trusted counselor, both realtor and lender, and have a really good talk about how to manage those rates. If you're on contract, let's suppose you've got a 4-year contract with Injit, and you're coming in, a 7-year ARM might be a good way to go to drop the rate if you realize that you're really leasing the house instead of just buying it, and trusting to be able to turn around and sell it without losing money, which I believe you can do. We're not expecting values to drop. There's a lot of options out there. I think people have just been so inundated with the pandemic market, they've forgotten that that was a very narrow bandwidth of all the options you have to purchase a home, get into a home, and make your living expense better and more in your control.
Michael Sargent giving you some props right now. Viewers and listeners, put the comments in the feed. We will relay them live on air. Give me the straight and succinct take of why you think valuations will not drop.
There's just not enough homes for sale. So in the absence of some dramatic outside effect that we can't predict. So if you're looking at 22 to 23, the generic expectation is that home values will still increase. But remember, 21 to 22, they came up 8.5% in value. That's where that $40,000 number comes from. And 22 to 23, we're expecting something closer to 2.5 to 3.25%. This is because of the low inventory. And even though we are encouraging developers, we've seen fewer housing starts. So there's nothing on the horizon that really makes us think the inventory crunch is going to get relieved, much like you might want to buy a car. Probably not a huge inventory out there. If you go to a dealer lot, you'll be lucky to find a car that got there that hasn't already been sold. We're still in that same space with houses, but the fervor is dying down a little bit as the demand side of that equation has come down.
Playing devil's advocate for the sake of a talk show, Jamie Turner's asked me to bring this up to you. You got a home that's sold at the peak of the pandemic. Let's call it a home in Albemarle County that sold, we'll say, $500,000. Peak of the pandemic. A lot of them traded for well more than that. Everyone that watches and listens to
500 is a nice even number, though.
That's right. Nice even number, right? Something that's digestible, a number. Peak of the pandemic, 500K on one street. Another house gets listed on that street. Price reductions are happening. A new term, price adjustments, price modification. I love the branding that's being utilized today. Let's call it a price modification is happening. And that price modification, home on the same street, that house is now listed at $450,000, $475,000. Tell us what the person that purchased the house at the top of the pandemic, 70% of folks that bought at the top of the pandemic, according to the National Association of Realtors, have at least one regret of buying then, how that valuation is not in a maybe a precarious position.
It depends on how long they're going to live in the house. So the sort of the rabbit hole that you can go down with housing stuff is trying to look at a specific snapshot that has one point in time. Everything is about the trends. And if you're only buying a house to live in it for 1 year, you probably shouldn't be buying a house. If you're in a 4 to 5 year ownership, it is nearly impossible, with the exception of the year around the crash and the time of great unpleasantness, it is nearly impossible to find houses that over a 5-year run didn't maintain or exceed their value. So in that moment, that $500,000 purchase that outside of the pandemic probably should have only been about $425,000 or $415,000 anyway, that is now compared to the $450,000. Let's suppose it drops down to $450,000. That means you're only ahead $35,000. And so you have to look at it in the full spectrum of it. And remember that $500,000 purchase, that homeowner, let's assume their mortgage payment, I want to say that's going to work out to be about $1,800 a month. That same house for rent is $2,400. So you have to look at the full equation of homeownership. Most of what we're talking about when we talk about building wealth and continuity in your life is about managing that monthly living expense and not letting it run with the market. Because once you purchase that house, it stops running with the market. And 99 out of 100 times, the normal family that's living in a house to live and not treating it as a commodity wins.
Feed's on fire. Daniel McDougall, the broker, the mortgage broker, we'll get to in a matter of moments. Sarah Hill Buczynski is watching the program, giving you some props right now. She highlights the price improvement terminology.
Yeah, price
so we got price improvement, price adjustment, price modification, price reduction, all the same thing, just a different way of delivering the branding, which I absolutely appreciate as someone who specializes in branding. Comments coming in fast and furious. McDougall says this, Daniel, he's talented. Price decreases will occur at certain price points in certain markets. They always have. That's just the nature of the beast.
And let's not confuse price adjustments or market corrections with market crashes.
Go down that road.
These are completely different things. You know, we're not set up for a market crash, which was based on a bubble where there were inflated home values with nothing to back them up. There is not hundreds of vacant homes sitting around. There are not the 50% of mortgages being fraudulent or just plain bad setups. There's not at all these same circumstances that we had in years past. And I think just because it feels similar and because we have so much anxiety, we want to yank in and catastrophize a little bit. And
that's true.
That's a pretty normal human reaction.
Yeah.
You know, there are moments where I lay awake at night and I wonder about these things.
And then what do you do? Do you do what I do from time to time and say, "Where's the Buffalo Trace"?
But I do think there's a...
You didn't want to touch that one?
No. I do think our desire to find the next thing that's going to go wrong is really high right now because we spent 2 years with that being true. Just remember, it wasn't always about housing. Housing was a symptom of different problems in terms of the ramp up that we saw in the pandemic.
Kevin Yancey, Waynesboro. Kevin, we appreciate you watching the show. He, from time to time, has a bearish outlook. I think that's straightforward. Kevin, I think you would agree with that. He says, for the folks that bought at the peak of the pandemic, please relay to Quinton, they've likely given up 2 to 3 years of appreciation with the timing that they purchased. What are your thoughts on that topic?
I think there's a potential for that. And I think, again, I don't want you to buy a house to be in it for just 2 years unless there's a really specific thing in your personal life that makes that work. I want you to buy houses to be in for 4 or 5. I want you to buy and hold houses because the value proves over time. You know, we talk about houses like we're talking about the stock market where you buy and sell every day, and that's not how we do housing. And for 90...
We got trained during the pandemic.
We did, and I think in the pandemic there was a whole lot of I didn't buy in February, so then when I bought in March it cost me $25,000 more dollars. It doesn't necessarily work that way in reverse. I'm not saying that we can't find a specific house and a specific homeowner that maybe had a really bad outcome because of decisions made along the way, but as the general rule of thumb, housing markets are a very wide, pretty flat bell curve where 80% of everybody in the middle does well.
Well said. Katie Pearl, you're great. I'm so grateful for seller concessions again. I just had a buyer client receive $15,000 in help with closing costs, which is so helpful for this particular family, Quinton.
Yep.
This is a good one. Michael Plecker, I concur with Quinton. 2008 was bad paper chasing, bad paper. This is a completely different market. Juan Sarmiento watching the program, the king of transportation, the top mechanic on the Charlottesville Albemarle Transit Fleet. We love when you watch the program, Juan. This question's come in. The term now is called a white-collar recession.
Well, let's talk about the overall economy for a second,
okay.
Because I know that there's probably people out there thinking I sound rosier than I should, and I'm not typically a rosy-sounding person. If you survey economists, you know, recession is more of a definition, and there's a particular government committee that gets together and they sit around the table and they look at all sorts of things like unemployment and stock market and GDP and GDI and decide whether or not we're in a recession. And until they decide, we're not officially in a recession. But if you survey economists, again, we're going back to that, we're going to survey 1,000 economists, more than 50% of them believe that we are already in a recession, and I'm probably in that crowd.
Me too.
I'm probably in that crowd. You know, we're starting to see jobs changes. We're starting to
Facebook is talking about laying off a lot of people.
So in terms of, if you're thinking I'm being too rosy, I do think that there's economic hard times ahead, and I think we're just waiting for unemployment to catch up. So far, Virginia has done really well. At the start of the pandemic, through the first few months, we lost 450,000 jobs in Virginia. 450,000 jobs.
That's a lot.
That's huge.
Yeah.
We are now recovered 400, I want to say it's 432,000 jobs, so we're about 18,000 short of being back to pre-pandemic levels. And those jobs are not recovered in the same industry segments as the jobs we lost. So professional and technical jobs, actually there's more of them now than there were pre-pandemic. Service, hospitality, and manufacturing is still behind. And there is a fair chance as we move forward in time that it's going to take some time to get inflation under control. Rates are going to continue to climb. We're probably going to see more layoffs, and I would wager that we've been in a recession for a while, and it will just take a while for the people that are looking in the rearview mirror to say, oh, that happened over here. So do I think we're economically in hard times? I really do. And do I think we're through the woods yet? No. I think we've got 12 to 18 months of not being in a great space economically, and that is going to affect housing. The difference between now and 2008 is housing was the epicenter of that explosion, and here it is not housing that is the epicenter, it's supply chains and it's inflation.
The talented Esquire John Blair watching the program in Stanton. We love you, JB. Woody Fincham, that is a key distinction, what Quinton just said. We are headed into a more normalized market, and QB is spot on. The utility of owner occupancy is for a roof over your head, not a blue chip investment. It's a long-term investment, not a buy and cash out situation. QB.
It is a long-term investment, and you know, we've said this at all spaces since I've started showing up on the show. If you're a typical homeowner, which is 90% of homeowners, where the house is the place you live, don't treat it like a commodity. Even at the peak of the pandemic pricing, when people were saying, well, should I sell my home to get this extra $80,000? And my thought is no. This is where you live. It's, this is a central part of your house, of your life, and you don't just turn around and treat it like a commodity when it's the only place you have. That may be different for commercial investors and people that have multiple renters, but primary homeownership is about homeownership and continuity to your life and fixing that. So that, no. And I think we're seeing, this financial sector contract. Kevin's really right. You're seeing lots of layoffs in financial sector because in the boom, everybody was going to catch up and sort of get that piece of the pie before the meringue melted. And now that that's shrinking, they're going to have to lay those people off. That is one of the industry segments where we're seeing jobs disappear.
Stock market, volatility, how does it impact these things?
I think
30% roughly, some of these down here.
There's a lot more talk now about how our economic expectations affect our economic realities. And so whether it's, let's talk about housing prices because that's the hot topic. When we expect housing prices to be coming down as a community or as a nation, we often then make housing prices come down. Sellers are more willing to do price improvements, adjustments, whatever buzzword we're going to use, because they don't have an expectation like they did in the pandemic of things being bid up over the list price. They're listening to us talk, they're hearing me say, you might get one, if you're lucky, 2 offers, no matter how great your house is, because that's the buyer demand now. And so what we expect as a nation is often what we create. If you expect inflation, you often create inflation because you understand that you have to pay more. And in some cases, if you're somebody that has more reserve, you stock up on things, which actually creates the supply issue and reinforces it.
We saw that
in
during
gasoline.
COVID. Yeah.
You know, remember the big Charlottesville gasoline scare?
Remember the Clorox wipes that we couldn't find because people were stockpiling? The toilet paper, QB, during COVID?
Toilet paper, you know, just all the
We made it worse.
All the crazy things we run out of. You know, it's such a first world problem. So I don't think the economy is going to be easy for anybody. Don't get me wrong. And certainly some people are set up to weather it better than others. And I remain concerned about the lower income echelon and what's going to happen to them in terms of economic health and their potential for home ownership or a reasonable place to rent, because they are consistently getting priced out. And if you look at the jobs reports for industry segments, the industries that recovered and recovered plus, meaning added jobs, versus the industries that kind of recovered but recovered minus, the ones that recovered minus are the folks that had the hardest time buying a house in the first place. And so that, with the price appreciation and the mortgage rate increase, just makes that gap for housing affordability and affordable housing, because those are different things, wider, and it's just going to take us more work than it did 2 years ago to bridge that gap.
Investors, multiple folks on the feed asking investors. Stu Rifkin, live and active right now. Talk to us about investors here and your take on the position they could be in right now. Especially the ones that did a little investing.
You know, that's a complicated, that's such a complicated question, because it depends so much on how you entered into that and when you entered into it. You know, we say all the time, the best time to buy a house was yesterday. And it's always yesterday, no matter what market we're talking about. And that has to do, again, with the longevity of it. So investment profiles, depending on whether we're talking residential versus commercial. So if you bought a commercial building for retail, you're probably not loving life right now. If you bought a commercial building with office space, you might not be so thrilled with how your outlooks. But if you bought one for manufacturing and industrial use, those markets are booming right now in commercial. So there's lots of ways to answer that, and it really depends on how the investor entered and what they entered into. And I don't know that there's an easy blanket statement, because you can't look at the deck of cards and say those are investors. It's all different suits and all different price points.
Chelsea and Crozet, please ask, we got a Mr. Beckham here. Please ask Mr. Beckham about the home equity line of credits and his thoughts on doing a HELOC. The rates aren't terrible, and we're considering one now. It's a slippery slope, my friend.
No, the rates aren't terrible. I think it depends on your overall debt picture. What are you carrying on credit cards? What are you doing the HELOC for?
That's what she's doing, the CCs.
You know, our expectation is that of all the rates that are going to really bounce up in ways that are terrible, credit cards are the worst. So if you can do a HELOC that has a locked-in rate that really affects that debt load that you're carrying, you know, if you're doing it, you should have a spreadsheet with all your credit cards and what's your interest charges every month, because that's where that saving comes in, and what's the difference going to be, and then really commit to just buckling down and paying that off. And, you know, maybe cut up a bunch of credit cards and get rid of them. We saw so many people over the last several years that have just maxed out everything. You know, the temptation, and I say this from personal experience, the temptation to pay off credit cards and then use them again in ways that are probably not very bright, and I say this from personal experience, is really high. So just make sure that you have a really solid plan, a really solid budget, and stick to it. Anything that reduces your interest rate debt load can be helpful to a budget if you're really disciplined and can follow that plan. Multiple
folks putting on the feed. Every other day we're getting direct mail pieces for HELOCs in the mail. I mean, I'm getting the same. It's bombardment.
You know, and you're probably getting offers from credit card companies for 0% times X month, move this debt. Remember that debt management companies, as they're seeing the amount of debt go down that they can manage, they're wanting to move that debt to them. They're competing for it. And so there's lots of ways people do this. I think what we want to see from all sectors is for people to be very cautious about debt as we move into the harder part of the economics, because in my personal opinion, there's still more job losses to come, and that's going to affect families. And so you just want to be super careful about how much debt you generate. I think taking the debt you have now and doing your best to get ahead of the curve and manage it well is a good decision. Be super disciplined and do your best to live on less than your current income.
Great question coming in from Faith Stewart. Used cars are at $40,000 or more. Your take, QB, on families moving in together to help spread the overhead?
I think multi-generational housing is something that we've really seen peak in the last 6 or 7 years. And a lot of that has to do with the 10-year lack of building. You know, we have not produced enough homes to house the families that we have. You also have 80 being the new 70 and 70 being the new 60. And so where we had boomers and others that were entering a retirement age and actively downsizing, you've had less of that, but they are still looking to have more accessibility features, easier ways to live, and often some of that includes bringing on children and grandchildren in a big enough house where they can have separate living space, and that's made really good sense. One of the things that we are wondering if it will help us with inventory is as we see boomers age into their 80s and the need for different styles of housing that's more accessible, that allows them to age in place, will that result in some inventory coming on the market as they move into other living circumstances?
Sarah Hill Buczynski, opening up a HELOC and having it as an accessibility tool is not a bad thing. It's an option for you. I agree with that take.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
I think, you know, part of why we're seeing rates come up to, well, there's two reasons. Of course, we want to get ahead of inflation and start to tamp that down, which means we have to have less money chasing the limited goods that are out there, because it always becomes a bidding war. But we also want to really discourage people that don't have debt from creating it. One of our fears, as you see housing values go up, we talked about that $40,000 in equity, is that somebody that entered the pandemic with zero debt will now feel like, well, I've got this extra $150,000 in my house, I'm going to do this, and create a debt that they didn't need in a market that is entering a recession. And so we really want folks to be conservative about their spending, slow down, manage the debt you have, and not create new debt if it is at all avoidable.
Follow-up question from Grayson. Does he expect the holidays to pick up volume? And do we see a market springing early in Q1 like that we saw in the pandemic? Or is the expectation the spring market is now back to being the spring market? That's a good question.
Hard to predict yet, but our fall market feels like our fall market. For the first time in years, we actually had people on vacation in August and getting ready for back to school, where you actually had to go to school as opposed to just moving from your bedroom into your basement. And so we did see what I sort of remember as this lull moving from the end of August into September. We are seeing more houses come on, and we're seeing more buyer activity comparatively like we used to in fall. I think this bodes well for us having a more typical seasonality in the next 2 years, but we'll have to wait to get to spring to see if that actually plays out.
Folks, multiple moms on the feed. Get Quinton's take on the school issues and how it could impact real estate. The school issue is the hottest button topic in Central Virginia right now. Certainly in Albemarle County, kids are getting school hours late. Your thoughts on the school predicament? There are a handful of schools in Albemarle County Public Schools that have been accredited, which means they're essentially getting audited for poor performance. Anywhere you want to go on that topic?
Oh gosh,
that's a hot button one.
It is a hot button one, and I'm so hesitant to talk on topics that don't feel like I'm even remotely knowledgeable about. I think if we're talking about how do the school issues affect housing, I don't think there's a big effect there. I know school districts are a big deal when we talk about housing, but that was also when you had many choices. And so if you think about who is the home buyer of median demographic now, we're probably talking about somebody that is not in the lower income echelons that we've talked about, that is middle class plus, or upper class, and their ability to choose a house that's either in a school district with a busing problem, but they don't care because they're going to drive, or in a bad school district, but they have options for private schooling. That's probably a larger percentage of home buyers than it was 2 years ago. And so I don't see some of the school issues having a direct effect on housing issues, although I can see it having a lot of effects on local government spending. And it's going to be a tough one to do the equation for as we move into recessions and you have lower tax revenues, lower sales revenues, and things impacting local budgets.
Outer counties, will they soften in valuations or demand? Your take on Waynesboro and the other side of the mountain as well. Outer counties were in fuego during the pandemic because of price point competition. Waynesboro had tremendous tailwinds because of price point competition in Charlottesville and Albemarle County. Now that the market is balancing, Waynesboro and outer counties, your take, Quinton Beckham.
I don't believe the market is at all balanced. It is still a very seller-oriented market, but it is cooling, and you're going to continue to see it cool all through the next 12 to 18 months. So what does that mean with specific prices? I think we need to see what happens over the next 3 to 6 months with recession. I think the biggest thing may be leading us back to spring, a spring market where you get a lot of inventory at spring, is going to be people sort of pausing to take their breath and see what's next. You know, I think part of what makes my adrenaline go up, and certainly a lot of our clients in the brokerage, is this idea that in 4 weeks we could be in a whole different world economically because things are changing at such a pace, and it seems like every time we turn around there's one new issue. So I think one of our biggest potential returns to seasonality is people trying to sit back and wait and see what happens so that they can feel more confident about making a decision that is within their budget, that is within their life expectations, and that's going to work for them for a longer run than just 6 months or a year. Kate
Lucas, the fabulous Kate Lucas, watching the program. Thank you, QB and Jerry, for another great real estate discussion. Watching the program. Thank you, Kate Lucas. Woody agrees with your take on the schools. He's an appraiser. I've been looking directly at schools and their impact on values in real estate. I do not yet see any effect right now, as this is a situation seen in almost every single school district. Speaks to your point there.
It is, and I think schools, you know, let's not talk about real estate for a second. Public education has been a real hot button issue, with a lot of things really rising to the surface over the last 5 years.
I mean, you could say it was the issue of the Virginia governor race, public schools.
Primarily, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do we sort that all out? Crap, I'm not sure I have a good idea for that off the top of my head that doesn't involve dynamite and blowing up an old system and rebuilding it from scratch. So there's a lot of opportunity in that because you might now have the political will because it is such a hot button issue, but we still have to find the money. You know, there's a lot of, we don't pay teachers what we should. I think anybody could have said that for the last 20 years and been right. And we are relying on a lot of infrastructure that is aging. And we're moving into a space now where we have to decide physical class versus virtual class and how does technology play in. And I'm not the expert to have an opinion on that. But there's just a whole lot of variables now that didn't exist even 3 years ago because of what we've had to go through with the pandemic and the styles of education that are out there.
Stephen, watching the program's got this comment on Spotify. Jerry asked Quinton's take on how this is going to impact the many agents we have in Central Virginia.
So Kevin had mentioned, and he's right, there's been a lot of mortgage brokerages and finance companies that are laying off people.
Or folded.
Or have folded and filed bankruptcy. And as you're already reading in the news, you have some larger companies that have started laying people off, real estate companies that have started doing layoff of their salaried staff or their marketing staff. And it is reasonable to expect that there's too many realtors for the inventory that we have. I think if you looked at realtors, which there's more real estate agents in Virginia than there are realtors, but there was one realtor for every 233 citizens when I last did the math.
Wow.
In the Commonwealth. I think as of Monday, there were 38,157 realtors in Virginia.
That's
alone.
a hell of a stat.
And I only know that because we were just at the conference when we were talking about numbers. Now, how many of those realtors actually sell? I have a realtor license, but do I actually sell? Not a whole lot.
Team.
This is true, but I work through other people as opposed to just directly myself. So there's a percentage of those folks that, are not looking for the next deal in the same way a sales agent are. But it's reasonable to expect that we've got more agents than we need for the inventory we have, and that will contract.
This is a very good one for you. Quinton Beckham, which zip codes will hold their values the most? Why don't we change the word from zip codes, Leslie, and call it jurisdictions?
I think that depends on what we decide is valuable over the next year. So if you're looking at affordability, where would you go? If drive time is an issue, where would you go? Value is something that's intrinsic to the individual deal. I don't think anybody's going to really suffer a lot. There have been so many value gains. We need to have a correction that brings those prices down some. And for the people that have been in those homes more than a hot minute, yes, the paper value is dropped, but their total value has not. It's just coming back to something more normal and less insane. And this is what we need. This is good. We need a more even market. We need a smoother flow. And we really need a way for developers to move from paper to shovel to key faster.
I'll say Charlottesville City and the Ivy Corridor will hold their values the most.
Sure.
Limited inventory in Charlottesville City, only 10.2 square miles. As you've identified, very close to the epicenter of employment, UVA. Ivy coveted because of Meriwether and Murray.
But I don't think anybody's going to lose a bunch of money on housing over the next year. I really don't. Yes, you can find individual circumstances. There's probably going to be some foreclosures. Not a huge amount because the rates that they got were so good, and they have the opportunity to put it on the market and ditch it. So we're going to have some individual circumstances where there was some value drop. But as far as any market, if you're looking at any county, any locale, the Shenandoah Valley in its entirety, and you're comparing this year to this year to this year, there's not going to be a huge drop where suddenly people are underwater without there being some other outside effect.
There was a bet made on Real Talk on Wednesday between Kevin Higgins and Kevin Yancey with Scott Morris. And the bet was tied to interest rates and close of business December 28th of this year, so right around the corner.
What was the bet?
The bet was this. Yancey and Higgins, they're both watching, believe the interest rates will touch 8%. Scott Morris, who's in the business, says, no way, Jose. They have a bottle of Crown and Ragged Branch on the line, and Yancey says if he loses, he's going to pour Scott a pour, not a bottle, of Pappy Van Winkle. I mean, that's a pretty serious bet right there.
Oh,
you probably want to take some of this action, don't you?
The Crown and Ragged Branch is such a bad counter to Pappy.
Pappy's the best. Pappy's the best.
Pappy's amazing, and
Yeah.
there's a great book on tape called Pappyland. I think you should listen to it. It's the history of Pappy Van Winkle.
Okay.
Really interesting. Well, some of it's boring, but most of it's very interesting if you're into that. I think they've got to up their game to match the Pappy. They really do.
Well, the Pappy was the pour. He was going to give.
And are we talking specifically about mortgage rates?
Yeah.
How much definition? A 30-year fixed rate.
30-year fixed rate, good credit, 10% down, good credit. Sometime between now and close of business of December 28th, 5 p.m., they'll hit 8%.
Yeah, I don't believe that. I would be on the other side of that.
Where do you think they'll go? 7 plus?
I don't think you're even going to hit 7.
Wow. Not even over 7.
Yeah.
High of 6 and change?
That would not surprise me.
Okay.
If it gets over 6.5 before the end of the year, I would be, and stays there, not just a little spike, but gets consistently up to like 6.5 plus or minus, I would be surprised. What about next year? I can't see that far. Most of the economists predict next year a average rate across the year of about 6%, which means some up and some down.
Quinton Beckham on fire right now. Throw this to you here. And he says, I have the First Crown XR red box. So it's not just Crown mid-shelf. That's Crown top shelf there. But
I don't have an issue with Crown. I just felt like against Pappy Van Winkle.
Pappy's the best.
You know.
Pappy, he bought retail at $900. And the Ragged Branch is also damn good too. But Pappy is the best. All right, so let's throw this to you here.
I really want to know how this bet works out, so you all have to make sure I know in case I'm distracted when it finally comes to an end. I'm very curious about this.
Well, because you also want the Pappy pour.
I also want to see the Pappy.
I've never had Pappy, Kevin Yancey, if you're watching here and you want to be generous.
And,
I know
and Kevin, he doesn't need it.
I do. I would love Pappy.
The last thing he needs is to feel more special.
What's the best bourbon you've ever had? Have you had Pappy?
What's the best bourbon I ever had?
Yeah.
Whatever one I had yesterday.
Wow. What was that?
And yesterday I would have said it was the one from the day before and the day before.
Okay, gotcha.
The last
have you had Pappy?
I have had Pappy, yes.
You have?
Yes.
And does it meet the expectations?
It's really incredibly good.
Yeah? And you have very refined and specific and high expectation taste when it comes to your bourbon.
Well,
I've seen it.
This could be true, but it's also true that there are some really good standard, if you're going to mix a drink, bourbons. It's what you're into, and there's different drinks for different circumstances.
So you kill it in this scenario, man. You are taking the methodical, voice of reason approach here. We will make it through this. Don't panic. Ignore the national media.
I don't think, panicking doesn't help, and panicking often makes it worse when we're talking about economics. I would like everybody to take a deep breath. Don't create debt. Make a budget and live in it. If you're a two-income household, can you live on one income? What would that look like? It's okay to save money and put it away to see what happens next. It would be lovely if your emergency fund was a savings account instead of your HELOC. Next step up from that is paying HELOC rates instead of credit card rates. Do what you can to do those things, because I do believe it's going to get harder. I know Kevin often wants to beat me because I sound too positive and Pollyanna. I do think it's going to get harder. I do think we've got some economic downturns ahead, but I think knowing it means that we can make a plan so that we're better suited to face up to it, and so that we're in a better position to come through it safe, sound, positive, and in the home that we own right now today.
Well said. Woody Fincham, bourbon aficionado. Pappy highlights the absurdity of scarcity outpacing common sense. Saint Bourdain and some articles made it an obsession. I have had Pappy 23. It is good, but it was not my favorite. Other folks are saying it's the smoothest bourbon and it's not even close. So a lot of Pappy fans on the show.
Pappy's a really hot bourbon.
Yeah, I mean it's the hottest brand.
Yeah,
it's the hottest brand. You make this show easy to host. All my job is to be the pace setter. This guy is the color commentator here, and he's an Emmy award-winning color commentator. All right, the voice that the strategy or the commentary that you're airing or you're releasing or you're relaying to the couple hundred people that count on your vision and your direction.
Take a deep breath. One, if you're looking to get into the home buying market, and mind you, you can't win if you don't get in the game. You got to get in the game. Sit down, make a solid plan for it, really look at your budget, and maybe it's not today. Maybe this is bad timing for you, and if so, I know everybody that works at my brokerage will be honest with you about that, and will give you good advice. But rents are just skyrocketing, and the number of doors we have is not enough. To folks that are wondering, what do I think is a way out of this? It's still more development, faster development with less red tape, because no matter what you think of housing prices, 25 cents of every buck you spend on your house is red tape. It's not a stick of wood. It's not one appliance or faucet or fixture. It's the amount of time it takes to go from starting a site plan to putting a key in the door, and all those costs get passed on. The more we can reduce the things that are not real tangible items, the better we make housing affordability. The more doors we have at any price point helps narrow that gap for affordable housing. And we're entering a space where this is gonna be hard, but let's not forget about it.
Do you see a rent bubble, a multifamily bubble on the horizon?
I don't know that I know enough to make a comment on that, other than to say, as fast as house prices have accelerated, rents are accelerating faster, and we're seeing competition for rentals in the last year, like we were seeing for houses last year. And so that's always something that is a bad sign. So I want to embrace Neil's sentence of more doors everywhere for everyone, and I'm including rentals as well as homes for sale.
Neil Williamson's son gets married tomorrow. Congratulations to the Williamson family. The most difficult question I ask you on the show, so what's for dinner and where are you going to go this weekend?
So I have a good friend that we should be celebrating a success we've been working at for 3 or 4 months that I can't say out loud yet, and I'm hoping to be at a bar with them, raising a glass, and probably having a meal at Tavla.
Tavla, tonight?
Yeah.
If you want to say hi to Quinton Beckham, that's where he's going to be. My friend, you're a host's dream. An hour flies by with you.
I had really strong coffee.
You crushed it today, per usual. We need to get you back here. Are you in town for an extended period?
I am in town next week, then I am gone for a week, so maybe talk to me after October 10th.
Okay, October. Quinton Beckham back in the house. When you see QB around town, give him props, give him a chest bump, a fist bump, a hug, whatever you want to do. He just hit a grand slam today. Quinton Beckham, Keller Williams Alliance. I'll say it again. Quinton Beckham, Keller Williams Alliance. The show is archived on realtalkwithkeithsmith.com. Folks, the I Love CVille show is up in 1 hour and 15 minutes. Right here on the I Love CVille Network. Thank you kindly for joining us. Joey Rifkin crushed it as the director. Judah Wickhauer is the producer. We will touch base with you very, very shortly. Take care. Quinton, damn good.
I had no idea what